good positioning takes a while to take a hold, but when it really does take a hold, it can really transform your company. Because I think the worst thing you can do is really honing on your positioning too early, really putting yourself into a corner, and all of a sudden that corner doesn't resonate at all with what you're offering.
Today's guest is Simon Smith from Lemoncore. Simon helps SaaS companies figure out their positioning through a workshop he calls The Squeeze. I've been lucky to go through his workshop, and in this conversation, we're going to share what positioning actually is and why it matters. What are the most common mistakes that companies do with their positioning, and how you can refine and test your positioning over time. Let's dive in.
Hello, Simon, and welcome to the show.
Hello, thanks for having me.
My pleasure. Yeah. Before we dive into what you do and what Lemoncore do, I think it might be a good idea to explain that what positioning actually means. I'm sure that many of the people who are listening or watching this know roughly what positioning means, but how would you describe it?
Yeah, it's kind of a interesting concept, right? It's something that's very fundamental, but a lot of times hard to grasp. So bad positioning, as a good example, is something that shows up everywhere. If you have sales calls that go weirdly wrong all of a sudden, that can hint that you have bad positioning or bad messaging. Like your positioning goes into investor pitches, how your team describes the company if you have a team, how your website is written and who it's written for. But those are just like some examples of like when it goes wrong, like in those kind of instances that usually is related to positioning. But positioning at its core is basically the core decision behind your business, right? So it is, who do you serve? What problem do you solve? And why on earth would someone pick you over whatever they're doing right now or whatever service they're having right now? So that's really positioning at its core, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally makes sense. And I guess that's one of the keywords that whatever they are doing right now. So not necessarily your competitor as you would sometimes people get like they think about too much about like who are my competitors versus what people are actually doing and how they
Yeah.
build those processes. You can include like so many other tools to achieve the same outcome, right?
Yeah, no, exactly. And that's why like it's so important to nail it early, right? Because if you get it wrong, you can really take the wrong turns, like with your business. Like all of a sudden, like you might completely switch your product because you think it doesn't resonate with anyone, but the product or service is great in itself. It's just not positioned in a way where it attracts the right buyers. Um, so yeah, it is an important concept and oftentimes very misunderstood in my experience.
Yeah, totally. What led you to start this one? I know that you've got background doing other stuff as well,
Yeah.
not necessarily positioning specifically, but what was the kind of insight or spark that, no, I'm going to do more related to positioning?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I came from content strategy before that, sold that as a service, but I kept hitting this wall where like, I don't know, I can't really help you with your content if your underlying like positioning is wrong. And that was usually always the value I provided in those like engagements that like, yes, the content strategy was cool, but the underlying positioning I worked up with clients was what really moved the needle for those people. And I just kind of grew apart from content. There's people that are much better at it than me, but I did think that the positioning part in itself was something I did well and I enjoyed a lot and people got a lot of value out of it. Mix that with the fact that I've worked for multiple SaaS companies. I understand what makes selling certain SaaS products easy and what makes it hard to implement them later on, because oftentimes you have this disconnect where something is sold a certain way. And then when it comes time to be used by the buyer, they're like, well, what the hell is this? We didn't buy this. We thought we bought something completely different. And there's this disconnect between what one part of the company talks about versus the other, which is poor positioning. So I figured, well, I think there's a real demand for positioning for SaaS companies specifically, especially in this age where everyone is advertising AI powered features, and it's very hard to differentiate yourself from your competition. So I'm going to productize the service. I'm going to make it really fast and quick and like add a lot of value to it, where I think a lot of SaaS companies will profit from it later on because it really fixes the fundamental issues a lot of startups have, which is, well, who are we serving? What problem are we really solving? And why would someone pick us? And yeah, this was what, basically led to this, what I call a squeeze, this like positioning sprint for SaaS startups.
Yeah, that makes sense, especially right now with AI being, it's changing the market, but also at the same time, people are moving really slow. So when I'm discussing with my prospects and customers, they're not like the heavy users of Claude Code. They don't have all the co-work in the or other routines, whatever Claude is advertising at the moment. They're not the heavy
Yeah.
users, and the world is moving a lot slower. But at the same time, you need to kind of like really think about it as a business owner, as a SaaS startup owner. You have to think about it like, what is right now the best positioning? Like you might have a lot of capabilities in your platform that only the early adapters will take a look at, and the rest will be just like, oh no, this is too much. We have all our
Yeah.
process. That won't go away. I think it's gonna be like something. And then another thing that because I've been part of your workshop as well, though I know from experience that already right now doing that workshop with you helped me to figure out that, okay, well, when I'm thinking about my positioning again, I have some tools. Like I already have some ideas that where I could start, what I could do to refine it, because we all know that my positioning right now in a few months time, it hopefully or most likely looks a bit different. So I
Yep.
need tools, and it's a continuous process, right? Yeah. Do you
Exactly. It's just like it's something. It's almost like a long-term bet in a way, where you're taking an educated guess based on what you currently see in the market, what your customers are saying, and kind of what makes you stand out. And then you take a bet on what your positioning will be, and it takes a few months to really see it through. And sometimes it's wrong, sometimes you went down the wrong avenue, but you collect data while you do that. That then informs the actual real positioning. But for the most part, yes, good positioning takes a while to take a hold. But when it really does take a hold, it can really transform your company, if that
Yeah.
makes sense.
Yeah, totally. When I ask founders in meetings or networking events, when I ask them to explain their company, they're often really good at it. Like
Yeah.
they tell me they're super excited about their product. When you're face to face with someone, they explain that, oh, we're working with this customer and they're so excited about that. And they kind of reveal the positioning in one way or
Mhm.
another. But then when you when you ask them to actually write it down or create a homepage or so, they're all of a sudden they're like completely clueless, as if they would not be working for that business at all. So what do you think? What makes it so difficult as a founder to kind of like do it on your own?
Yeah. I think like the reason why it works first is that in a conversation, you can easily adapt, right? Like you read the person, they might ask you like they ask you follow-ups, like, and you just adjust based on that. But like for positioning in itself forces you to really commit to one story that works without you in the room. So for instance, if you have a sales guy, like that person should tell the exact same story that you tell. If they tell a different story, then the positioning is wrong, which is why it's hard to do it yourself, because you as a founder, for instance, you also think from the product in an outward way, right? So you use insider language, you skip certain context that like you forgot like a customer might need. And you just like think about things that are obvious to you, but might not be obvious to a customer. But I think the biggest problem is that uh, you think more about like, oh, this is what we can do. But like, why on earth should a customer care about what you can do, right? Like you have to tie what you can do to something that like to a problem that a customer experiences. And if you can't do that, if you can't explain that properly, then your positioning will be bad. The main reason that positioning is hard in itself is that there are certain things that are counterintuitive that you won't be able to solve with AI, right? So AI is like great at wording, like like your positioning, right? Like it's great at writing copy, but it's very bad at like deciding what actually goes into your positioning. So like, which is your ideal customer? Which is the specific problem those customers have? What are the alternatives for those customers, right? Is it a certain use case, or is it like a competitor product? All those things the AI doesn't necessarily know unless you tell it to kind of take it into consideration. And if you don't know to tell the AI that, well, then your positioning is not going to be easy to figure out by yourself. Um, and then obviously like AI also like will confidently write something for you that's very vague, and you just might not realize it because you don't know what good necessarily looks like, if that makes sense.
Yeah, 100%. With AI in general, when using it, I'm a heavy user because of I'm coding all the time of
Mhm.
building the product, and then I do marketing stuff, and then our whole product is built on top of the AI model. So it's like I don't know, I live and breathe this whole thing. But what I notice often is that even if you give the context, so to give you an example, I gave as a context, I gave the discussions that we had together, and then I asked a specific question about our positioning and so forth. The first reply is looking at the context, and it's like, okay, yeah, hey, here's a really sharp. If you do the prompt really good, it's a sharp answer. But the
Mhm.
next, when you start like exploring the topics, then the context starts to fill up with everything the AI is also, replying. So
Mhm.
the more questions go on, it's like, what is this? What is going on here?
Yeah.
This doesn't really make sense. And another day, someone told me that he is now a bit disappointed with the process that he built with AI, which was supposed to kind of like land 3 blog posts every week. And he said
Mhm.
that first it was working really well, but then all of a sudden it started like producing sloppy content. And I'm
Yeah.
like, I know what it is, but I'm not gonna start like I'm not trying to educate you. So basically, what I mean is that yes, you can get specific answers from AI if you ask that question, but
Mhm.
the what happens straight after that one, then the AI's weaknesses start to kind of like appear very quickly.
Exactly. And also like the AI takes like an aggregate of things, right? So if you ask it to give you a specific niche for your product, for instance, then it will just take into account all the different niches that are seen or like the different ways people talk about their customer persona. And it will just give you something very generic. And then if you press it on it, it will be like, well, yeah, you're right. This is not that good, you know? But that just shows you that you need to know what you're really looking for. Otherwise, you will just get subpar output from AI. And I think most companies I've talked with that have been trying to do their positioning by themselves because they know that positioning isn't great because sales don't really go the way that they should go. Like messaging kind of falls apart. Like during sales calls, they try to figure out their positioning through internal meetings. You know, they meet once a week, and every week something changes. But they don't really look at certain aspects that they should look like, right? Just because they're so caught up in the same repeating cycle of, well, who really wants to buy us, you know? But they don't really ask, why does anyone want to buy us? And then they use AI to come up with these ideas, and they just get the same circle jerk, so to say,
Yeah.
where you keep spinning your wheels, you know? And that's when it helps to get an outside perspective that comes in and asks questions that you haven't really thought about, you know? That then all of a sudden unlocks something where like you have ideally this eureka moment where you think, oh, well, this is exactly what we tried to get at for the last 3 weeks. I don't know where we didn't think about it. But again, sometimes you can't read the label from inside the jar. I think that's how I'd say, where like you're so caught up in your own product that you don't see certain developments you probably should consider for your positioning.
Yeah, it's so ironic that kind of like AI's role could be to give you that third person view and help you with that, but it's not. It's not. It's just like taking what you give and just like you said that if you mention a certain keyword and it goes, well, all right, I'm gonna search for this information. So you really need to be good at like distilling the information, not giving any ideas. Just like okay, I want to have this information. On the other hand, that's like something that product managers have done, the good ones have done all the time. So, like when they've explained a concept to developers, designers, to everyone, they want to
Mhm.
get exact information and nothing else. They don't want people to be like, okay, I'm so confused. There's like so many angles in this one, and I think those people are really like they have a really good chance of getting results
Yeah.
from that one. But positioning is super hard. One question that I actually got the other day from another founder was that how do I choose between multiple opportunities that we have? And then
Mhm.
it was followed by a question saying that should I kind of like go with limited data towards one? And they had the impression that it's that's what they should do. But how do you advise companies that are very early in the
Mhm.
process? They don't have data yet. How do you kind of approach the fact that you have multiple segments? How to kind of position around that?
Yeah, that's a really good question because it's actually a very tricky one to answer, right? Like a regular positioning exercise, you assume you have a fairly big customer base. And then you look at your best customers, like what are they saying? They struggled before they used your product. Kind of like what alternatives did they have? Like what do they like about your product? What makes your product the best fit for them, etc. But take, for instance, like a really early startup that hasn't had any customers. They might have had funding. They have conducted user interviews, and the user interviews, they give you a certain pattern, but it's just a hypothesis. So now it's up to you to test that hypothesis, but you don't want to dive all in to one positioning where we say we sell, I don't know, we sell prepackaged, or like, no, sorry, what's a better example? We sell custom desktops, custom wallpapers, or custom desktop wallpapers to Catholic men between 30 and 40 years old,
Yeah.
just because you had like 4 users you interviewed that were fitting that criteria and they like your product. Um, what you can do is you go in a certain direction that you think, based on the data you have, there's a very real chance those people will resonate with you. But you shouldn't go all in with that. You should keep your positioning loose, and then what your GTM motions are, like kind of like target them at different subsets, right? So for instance, if you are someone that wants to, like, you conducted interviews and you think your SaaS solution is really good for, kind of talked about this before, but for professional service firms, well, that's still somewhat broad and you want to test that. You could like create different content pieces that talk to specific subsets of that niche, right? And then see what resonates. And that would give you an idea. Well, we signed a few clients from this subset, and then we signed other clients from a different subset. And then, and slowly but surely, you build a customer base, and then you get that data, that actual real life data that hints at what the positioning could be. But in the very beginning, I think the best thing to do is to keep your positioning loose, to do these little micro studies for your hypothesis and almost treat it like a research project. You need to gather data that supports your hypothesis or data that contradicts your hypothesis. And then you develop a new hypothesis and you kind of slowly but surely climb the mountain. At the peak of the mountain is your actual positioning, your actual persona. But you have to take a few detours in the beginning and experiment a little bit to really nail the positioning. Because I think the worst thing you can do is really honing on your positioning too early, really putting yourself into a corner, and all of a sudden that corner doesn't resonate at all with what you're offering. And then you're like, well, crap, I think my product sucks. Maybe we have to like completely iterate or do a pivot on what we developed here, even though the product is great. You just never really explored other possible venues with it, right? But another caveat here is that if you do have some customers, and say like you work with, I don't know, you work with mostly financial advisors, and then you also work with this financial services firm on top of it because you knew the guy that started the firm from way back in the day. You went to high school together and you cross paths again, they signed you for $100,000 a year, but all your other clients, they pay you, I don't know, like $500 a month, right? Then you're like, well, we don't want to say financial advisors because we have this one big financial services company. We also want to advertise to them. So we want to say we are for financial advisors and for financial services firms. But then again, the question here is like, well, this is not a very clearly defined niche. And why are you keeping this financial services firm in that? Are you feeling confident that you will attract more financial services firms in the future? Do you have more buddies from high school that have financial services firms they started, or do you not have that? And are you just good at attracting financial advisors instead? Because if it's the latter example, then you should really just go with that niche and chalk that $100,000 engagement up as like a nice to have, but don't advertise it because it steers you in a direction you can't really sustain going forward, if that makes sense.
Yeah, 100%. Like how I try to approach it, especially now that I've been building another company again, I've been like trying to narrow it down based on the problem so that I've
Mhm.
kind of like kept like, okay, it doesn't matter what industry it is. as long as the problem is the same. And that already is a tough enough kind of
Yeah.
like exclusion at the start when you're absolutely not sure if this is gonna work out or like who is the right customer. And I fully agree, and I'm like I wish I could do something about this, but like
Mhm.
a lot of founders are often coming up with new products faster than they are testing the market. So they are like rather dropping a great product or a promising idea just because they didn't have the energy, the kind of the resistance and so forth
Mhm.
to figure out how I could market this, how I could sell this. And my only kind of like how I how I kind of like I would advise those people to do it is to start posting on LinkedIn or whatever social media channel makes sense for you, because it's the best place to test the message. It doesn't mean that I'm not getting like with all my posts, I'm like getting only a client here and then, but I
Mhm.
can definitely sense like, okay, is this working at all? And what type of people are connecting with me? And is there like anyone coming through this post or not? Sometimes you get a lot of likes, a lot of comments to something that doesn't bring like anything. It's like just
Yeah.
completely quiet. And then like some posts will bring, so I'd use that at least, if nothing else, but some sort of like, maybe you have a Slack community, maybe you have, yeah, social media channels wherever you can test those ideas. And that's
Yeah.
the only way how I kind of play it.
That's that's really a good way to test your positioning, but it also kind of highlights how important it is to at least have some sort of positioning, no matter how early you are.
Yeah.
Because in this day and age, it has never been easier to create content. So content is everywhere, even on LinkedIn, where say 3 years ago, it was a lot easier to stand out as long as you had a somewhat defined niche, the right buyers would find you. Nowadays, it's so oversaturated. People see content left and right that you do have to pick some sort of lane, and then you can still deviate from that lane from time to time. It's kind of what you were saying, that you do these micro tests. So, as an example, and we talked about this before, but if you want to sell to professional services firms, that's your hypothesis. You could, from a content angle, post different scenarios where you describe, well, this, like, Alex is a financial advisor from Pennsylvania, and he like decided to go solo last year and wants to kind of like try his luck with finding his own new clients. The problem now is he has a hard time creating content, so we created a content plan for him, just to stay with a content example. Then your next post would be, well, this is, I don't know, Samantha. She's a travel consultant for B2B consultants, and she struggles with X, Y, and Z and wants to post content. And this is what we did for her. So you try out different micro positionings in your content to see if that resonates with anything. But the point I was trying to make overall is that you do have to pick a lane today, because there's so many different competing things with your attention span that you have to kind of like channel your resources in a specific way, where you only have so many hours on a certain day. You have all these kind of things you have to do as someone that has their own company. Like, pick one marketing channel, like pick a specific niche there, and good things will happen. Because if you go broad and you try every marketing channel, you try every different niche out there, it'd be very, very, very hard to get any traction whatsoever.
Yeah, and what makes this really hard is the fact that at the same time you need to pick the product decisions, make those decisions. So I was
Exactly.
discussing with one company yesterday that uh, they have like maybe 3 or 4 different positioning opportunities in a way. They've got like 4 different segments. There is some shared problem with all of them, but still they are quite different looking
Mhm.
opportunity. Majority in one, but of those 4 of their customers are in one segment, but the more like people that are gonna be there longer, are gonna pay more, and so forth, are in other segments. So they've got a hard choice to make. But the key point is not the fact that are you gonna find that positioning, or are you gonna change that positioning. The key point is that you need to make that choice for your product. Like, what are you gonna develop? Are you gonna
Yeah.
develop this segment or this segment? And like, ironically, you can build now everything. And then at the same time, you shouldn't build everything. So it's like you can ask Claude Code to like expand your product to all possible segments, but it's not going to be a great product. and the
Yeah.
great product comes from like being really really certain who the customer is. So yeah, I wouldn't like, this is not necessary like, I think people think about this positioning messaging often through the
Mm,
lens of sales and marketing, whereas this is actually the whole company
yeah,
direction is kind of like, if you discuss with these type of customers from this angle, you get the feedback. That feedback goes to the product development, and yeah, it's a
yeah,
much more complex than just what the homepage will say.
exactly. Like all these things like that you do, like if they don't work and you can't figure out why, there's a good chance it's positioning, right? Like your sales calls lead nowhere, even though you build a good rapport with someone, or people don't really understand what you do in your website, or you get referrals that completely have nothing to do with what you offer. That all kind of hints in that direction.
What the you're doing positioning workshop, and I was one of
Mhm.
the guinea pigs of yours, which was awesome experience. But could you explain to the listeners who are watching or listening to this, that what are the key steps of the positioning workshop that you're doing right now?
Yeah. So like it's just 4 workshops. I try to keep it short to comfort people's time, especially SaaS founders. Like you always have meeting after meeting and I don't want to rob too much of your time. So it's 4 workshops, along with a review session. And each workshop targets like a different aspect of positioning, right? So in the first workshop, we cover who buys your product, what do they do without your product, etc. In the second one, we talk about like what can your product do that the alternatives cannot do, and it's not just the features there, but it's also like the real differences um, that are compared to what a prospective customer would do if you were in the route, right? Then in the third workshop, we take a look at like what kind of customer cares the most about your product and how should the market overall think of you, or your product, right? Out of everyone who could buy, who feels the problem that you solve the hardest, and what box, more importantly, do you want other people to put your product in, right? So, for instance, if someone um, refers you, like, how should they describe your company? That's the third workshop, and then the fourth workshop is the timing, right? So when does a client exactly need you? Like what kind of situation are they in? And what's going on in the industry overall, certain trends that makes this particularly urgent. So we cover those 4 workshops. Of course, there's more things that go into that, but I don't want to divulge too much. And then what comes out of that is I produce like a positioning strategy deck or document as well as wireframes for your homepage. And the idea behind that is that while we spend all this time developing your positioning strategy, we also want to make sure that the positioning strategy is being used, right? So we have certain like talking points, certain positioning mentions that we provide. And then the homepage should reflect your new positioning, right? So if you have a company that has not just you, but maybe your co-founder or like a founding sales director or the product manager or marketer, they should all talk about the product in the same exact way. And of course, a document is nice, but people lose documents all the time. But a website, especially if it's the one for your own company, is easy to navigate to. So if you're getting ready for a sales call and you forgot what your founder came up for with the positioning, then you can just go to your own homepage, read the positioning right there. And that's kind of the outcome that comes out of these workshops. It's your positioning strategy that sits somewhere where people actually know how to navigate to, if that makes
Yeah,
sense.
the the homepage is a great example in terms of like, so many companies might be doing this sort of internally. They might be like thinking about their positioning. They might be changing the direction quite a few times, but then they don't really take any action when it comes to like their whole website, their homepage, their other pages, their new marketing content. Everyone just like has the people have the meeting. They decide that our new target is that, but then when they go to their desk, they continue doing the exact same things what
Yeah,
they've been doing. I think that's one of the risks of at least doing it internally. You don't necessarily have that full buy-in for it. It can be
yeah,
like one meeting that turns into a positioning discussion, but it's not really formalized. So I think that's where
exactly.
the like having someone like you will pay off quite a bit. That there's like this, you paid for it, and then also you have kind of like there's something like a material that that is pushing you towards, okay, we need to take action somewhere.
Yeah, no, exactly. And that was the thought behind it. I'm not a website designer or copywriter, right? But I want what we produce because I think it's valuable, very valuable, actually. I want it to be used. And also it makes for better case studies that way. So, in a way, it's almost change management, right? It's like I worked for companies where like you sell software to industries that traditionally have done everything manual. It's really important to to do change management well, and positioning or strategy as a whole is change management to a degree, right? You need the buy-in from everyone in the organization to really go with this, because a lot of times a positioning exercise can be a little uncomfortable, because if you have a new product, you want to sell it to everyone because technically your product is good for everyone, right? Everyone gets value out of it. And by everyone, I mean SaaS companies, consultants, professional service firms, everyone and their grandma. But you don't have the bandwidth for that, right? But yeah, you need to basically be aligned there. And change management is a really tricky position there. And if you go with it and you are okay with being a little bit uncomfortable in the beginning when you try something new and you really pigeonhole yourself, it's hard, and then people go with, well, let's do what we are comfortable with, which is what we did before, even though it didn't really work. But I think if we just get better at selling, we don't really need to redo our positioning. We just like keep selling to everyone. That's the wrong thing. You really have to resist that urge. You have to see it through, test it out, and be comfortable with like trying new things. Otherwise, positioning is just hard to do and you will be stuck for a long, long time.
Yeah, that's probably the hardest part for
Yeah.
founders is to kind of like make sure that, well, I'll need to make some changes, so I will need to have an open mind to actually do this
Mhm.
and kind of go through that whole process. It's easier said than done when you're like
Yeah.
super deep in some form of a business. So
Yeah.
yeah, super hard. And what I've been thinking a lot uh, all through these years, I've been an entrepreneur more than 15 years. I've been running businesses. What is really hard is that I'm building something for the future while
Mhm.
I'm selling something today. So I've got like a vision what this company will be, and that's always in my mind. I can't just lose it.
Yeah.
It's always there. But at the same time, I will need to like position myself for today, and that's
Yeah.
a good one. The final question I have, you mentioned the SaaS companies are founders are one of your target groups. Who are the best customers for you, and then where can those customers find you when they listen to this?
Yeah, it's a good question. So for me, like what I decided is that I want to work, or like that I'm working right now with early stage SaaS startups. Not that early where they don't have customers. I want some customers because the positioning workshops run best for those. But if you have a SaaS product that you built like a while ago and it's still in its early infant stage, but you have customers, but you don't really know where you're going with this. Are those the right customers? Are we selling to those customers the right way? Um, is the problem we're solving really something people care about? If you have those questions and you want those answered, you can find me right now. It's the best way to get in touch with me is on LinkedIn, just with my name, Simon Schmitz. And Lemoncore, that's the name of my company, so you can find me there. So yeah, if you feel like there's something kind of wrong that you can't seem to figure out, like your sales calls don't go the way you want, like you get the wrong referrals, people talk about you in the wrong way, then yeah, message me and I'll take a look and see if it makes sense to work together or not. And yeah, always excited to meet new faces. So yeah,
Yeah, thank you
that's
so much
basically,
for sharing your story, Simon. And
of
I know
course.
you need to jump to another one, but um, I'm sure that listeners get a lot of value out of this, and I will link to your LinkedIn profile so
Yes.
that people can find you easily in the show
Thank
notes.
you. Yeah,
Thank you
this was
so
a
much.
ton of fun. Thanks, Tony. Really appreciate it. Have a good one.